Alright, so now we have electrons just kind of chilling out in the thylakoid membrane. They're not as high energy anymore because some of their energy has been used to transport those hydrogen ions across the membrane. Okay, so now photosystem 1 is going to capture more energy, shove that back into those electrons, and then use that to produce energy-carrying molecules. So again, chlorophyll will absorb energy from the sunlight and pass that into the electrons. And then those energized electrons are going to be used to make something called NADPH. So NADPH will then be transferred to the light-independent reactions. And then the hydrogen ions are also going to be used to create ATP. Okay? And some of them also get used in the production of the NADPH, but alright. So, photosystem 1 looks almost identical to photosystem 2. Okay? You've got your chlorophyll hanging out in the thylakoid membrane here, and the chlorophyll will absorb that energy and basically charge the, or produces the charge inside of the membrane, and then passes that off into NADP plus to produce NADPH. Okay, it is an energy-carrying molecule, and then it will also, or photosystem 1 will also use those hydrogen molecules that it spent all that time building up inside the thylakoid in photosystem 2, and it will use those hydrogen molecules to produce ATP. Alright, so going through this, we're going to start with 4 because photosystem 2 had the 3 steps. Okay, so photosystem 1 is going to absorb energy from sunlight into these chlorophyll, and that will increase the energy of the electrons again. Okay, so they lost all that lost a good bit of that energy when they were transporting hydrogen ions across the membrane. So now they're getting energy back. And once they get that energy back, they're going to actually leave the membrane. So they've reached the end of the electron transport chain. Now they're getting kicked out of the membrane. Okay, so when they get kicked out, they find an NADP plus molecule. Okay, so energy from the electrons is going to be bound into that NADP plus molecule to form NADPH. Okay, and then the hydrogens are also, like one hydrogen is also going to bind onto this to help store some of that energy as well. Okay, now when we get to cellular respiration in 4.4, okay, you're going to notice that cellular respiration has NAD plus and NADH. Okay, so very similar to photosynthesis's the NADP plus and NADPH. I always say the way to remember it is you've got a P in the NADP plus and NADPH stands for plants. Okay? Alright, so you still have all of these hydrogen ions built up inside of the thylakoid from photosystem 2. So those are now going to find a protein channel called ATP synthase. Okay, so that actually tells you what it does. It synthesizes ATP, so it creates ATP. Right? So when those hydrogen ions pass through ATP synthase, they're actually going to leave a lot of the energy that was used in forcing them across the membrane against their concentration gradient. They're going to leave that energy with the ATP synthase. Okay, so the ATP synthase will then use a phosphate and that energy to create ATP from an ADP molecule. Okay, so it'll pass that off onto the ADP. One of the hydrogens will then go bond an NADP plus with those electrons to form NADPH. Okay, so pretty nice little elegant system. It's using everything that it's created. It's just kind of moving everything around and storing energy here. So you're producing NADPH, which is a high energy molecule, and ATP, okay, which we already know is a high energy molecule. So both of those are now going to go into the light independent reactions. Okay, so photosynthesis does actually produce some ATP. It's not a lot, and it pretty much almost instantly gets used up in the light independent reactions. Okay, so this is not something like you're going to see later in cellular respiration where you produce a bunch of ATP at once. Okay, this is just producing ATP so that the next stage of photosynthesis can continue. Okay, so we already kind of talked about this. The ADP molecules accept the energy produced by the hydrogen ions diffusing across the membrane to form ATP. That ATP will then get pushed into the light independent reactions. Okay? All right. So a little bit more about ATP synthase. It is a protein channel that is found in the membranes of both chloroplasts and mitochondria and some other molecules or some other organisms. Really depends on the organism itself and how much energy it's going to be producing. ATP synthase is really the kind of gold standard for producing ATP. It uses hydrogen ions, okay, that have been built up against their concentration gradient in order to basically create that energy, or really move that energy around to create ATP. So it really facilitates the reaction between ADP and a phosphate group in order to add that phosphate group onto the ADP to create ATP. These are some images of what it actually looks like. Okay, kind of looks like a mushroom. Weird little thing. But yeah, so hydrogen ions will flow through the ATP synthase. It is a channel, after all. And those hydrogen ions bonding or flowing through the ATP synthase will actually change the shape of the protein, which then allows it to facilitate the reaction between the ADP and the phosphate group. Okay, so the ATP synthase uses the energy from the hydrogen ions to create ATP. All right, so that is it for this section. So in the next section, we're going to pick up with the light independent reactions, and we're also going to talk, so because both of these sections deal with photosynthesis, the additional videos are going to be in the next section. So this one's going to seem kind of short because all of that's going to be later. Okay.